Welcome to another edition of the Invisible Wheelchair Podcast. I'm Don Grodoff. Along with my wife Gina, we have a practice called Focused Healthy Family, helping families get past the behavior and anxiety issues naturally. We also produce the Invisible Wheelchair Podcast, where we are advocates for our own family and others dealing with OCD and anxiety. In the Invisible Wheelchair Podcast, we do interviews, provide resources, and information for treatment and support of OCD recovery. We also want to hear from you, your comments, and if you want to tell your story, we want to put it up on the podcast, on our Stories from the OCD side. Our goal in these podcasts is to raise awareness of and advocate for the recovery from obsessive-compulsive disorder, better known as OCD. Sponsoring our podcast is Quintessential Biosciences, better known as Q Sciences. Gina and I learned the hard way when we realized our daughter's supplements weren't being absorbed properly, and she really wasn't getting the nutrients that she needed. We knew the power of quality supplements in our health of our family, so it was time to find a better product. That is when we were introduced to Q Sciences. Q Sciences products provide the highest quality, maximum absorption possible, and improved health for the body and mind. Products like hemp oil, sleep spray, and Kids Focus convinced us that they really make a difference in our family's health. You too can have a healthy family, so stop wasting your money on supplements that don't work. Check out Q Science products today at qscience.focusedhealthyfamily.com. That's the letter Q, sciences.focusedhealthyfamily.com. You can also find the link on the invisiblewheelchair.com front page. Now, let's get to that podcast. This podcast was recorded May 22nd, 2021. This is podcast number 57. And this podcast is called Helping Children and Teens with Disabilities. Now, what I decided this month, since later on this month we're going to have on as an interview with a lawyer, a special needs and disability lawyer. And she is really good about talking about things that I hadn't even thought about, that we need to think about if we have a child that has special needs or disabilities or anxieties. And so I wanted to talk about disabilities today because I have two children with OCD, and this podcast is about anxiety and OCD. And in my mind, I had never really classified it or thought about OCD being a disability. But I especially now, after doing some research into it and looking into it, it is a disability. In fact, the American Disabilities Act of 1990 actually classifies OCD as a disability. I don't know if that particular act does it within the perimeters of it, but they have since classified it. And I wanted to define what disability really is. And by definition, a physical or mental condition that limits a person's movements, senses, or activities. And so, you can easily see if you're dealing with OCD, even if you're dealing with anxiety, if it is crippling you, if it is holding you back, if it is stopping you, then you really can consider it a disability. And you may want to investigate, because the American Disability Act of 1990, really what it did was to help stop discriminations and keep employers from asking too many questions and really not having a prejudice against uh, anybody that's disabled, to be able to give them fair and equal accommodations, equal rights, all of that stuff is what that act really did. It also, I think, helped to be able to stir some assistance that you can get in helping you financially, things like that. So if you hadn't thought about it before, if you're dealing with somebody with anxiety or OCD, you may want to look into what's out there, and that's something I may work on finding more information about the different resources as far as subsidies or something like that, grants, things like that that can help you financially. But what I was going to do today is really talk about how you can help. Um, like I said, I had never classified in my mind that OCD was a disability, but it really is. And what I found was one of the things I thought was a really good article on it comes from a parenting website from Australia. It is called Raising Children, and it's raisingchildren.net.au. So if you want to go in and it's a pretty decent site. And on it, they have this. They talk a lot about teenagers with this, and the article is called "Anxiety: Teenagers with Disability and Chronic Conditions." And the first thing they talk about here is kind of uh, what a person with disabilities really is anxious or has anxiety about. And what they list here is first off is having medical procedures, going in for tests. I know some of the disabled people that I have known, worked with, been around, they go in for constant testing and constant probing and finding out. Um, missing out in school, you know, or missing out on having friends or a relationship, of ever having a relationship. There's a lot of anxiety behind being judged because of their disability. Again, and that's where that ADA, that act comes in. It really helps to be not be discriminated in, but that doesn't mean that by your peers, by school, that you're not still having that kind of peer pressure. They worry about not what they're not able to achieve in their life. Are they able to get the goals that they want? Are they able to do the things they want? They also worry about being a burden on their families. I understand that one. I in the work I do and the clients that I see, I get some of that. I get some of that people are so worried about their illness or their anxiety or their stress and the disorders that they have, that they're worried about how they're going to be judged by their family, but not only judged, but that they're going to turn out to be a burden. And then, a lot of it's an anxiety around, is this going to get worse? Am I going to die? All of that. Now, so what they talk about here is how you can help the person that's going through the disability. And so I'm going to go through the list, but I'm going to add in some things that I know for myself too. So um, first off, they talk about having proper information that they to inform the child of what's going on. And I think that's very important. I know when we first got into this with my first daughter and her OCD, we went back and forth. One, just do we even label it? Do we even tell her what that is? And then being able to give her information about it. And we went back and forth for quite a while trying to figure that out. Do we tell her or not? And we found that giving her the information, telling her what it was, helped in a lot of ways. It helped her not to feel crazy or that she was the only one that was going through it, and to know that there was something really wrong. There was something going on in her mind that made this happen. That again, so that she didn't feel crazy about it. And they talk about talking regularly with the child about what's going on for them. Do they have questions? Um, you know, Before you go into an appointment, like with a doctor, to talk about it beforehand. To because you can then know. Because I know for myself, my kids had a hard time talking to any therapist or doctor or anything. So it was what we were able to do sometimes were to be able to say, look, when we go in, would you want me to be able to, to tell the doctor some of these things for you? And then encourage them to slowly open up to him. So in other words, we didn't push them to just talk to him. Come on, talk to him. We talked to him ahead of time, kind of got the idea of what's going on for them, and then said, do you want us to talk about it? Are you willing to talk to the doctor about it? So they talk about here to find ways of giving your child choices, to feel in control. And I know, with OCD, that the big thing, and anxiety for that matter too, is that I, as a parent, couldn't solve it for them. And even though I wanted to, but they had to make it powerful, make the treatment powerful. They had to be able to be in on it. They had to be part of it, and making choices to them. Do you want to, in the ERP treatment we did with my daughter, we gave her some choices. Do you want to work on this, compensation or this compulsion first, or this one? Do you want to do it today or tomorrow? So it gives them some sense of control and actually helps them in being part of the cure. Um, and they talk about here to help your child learn to manage her own health care. And again, this is what I just talked about in the fact of being able to give them some control because they are the ones that really, as far as anxiety goes, they're the ones that have to really work to solve it. When it comes to the physical stuff, then talk to them about how they would like to proceed with it. What give let tell them what your thoughts are on it too, but let them have some say in it so that it. So they talk about here to try to make home treatments less stressful. And we go through that right now. We're going through some stuff with my youngest in doing some treatment work here at home, and we have to really be careful with it because it can stress, being that it's an anxiety treatment, it alone can stress them. So, one, again, talking to them about how they would want to do it, and always making sure that you say, well, that's great, but no, don't use but. If they say, I just don't know if I could do that, you can say, oh, so you don't really feel like you do it. Well, what I see, or the problem that I see, is that we do need to do these because we want to. You do want to get to the place of being better or feeling better. You know, the other thing in here they remind us about doing it routinely so that it becomes a habit. Um, so here, talk with your child about how he could explain his condition to other people. So what I wanted to that's important. How do you say it? How comfortable are you with saying it? And how do you express it so they understand? How do you do it so you don't get too complicated using terms that they may not understand that you have learned and understood, or your child has understood about, the different technical things that might be going on, or the terms of your medication, or the terms of what's going on in your brain or you physically, might be a bit overwhelming for others. So finding ways to simply explain it to others. But here's what I would add to that, and I think this was an important thing we learned. was to educate friends and family about the condition and what it means, what they're going through, how they're feeling about it. And then on top of that, and here's the tougher part of that, is being able to ask for help. What can they do to be of assistance to you? And it may be simple. In my oldest daughter's case, I wish we would have really known that or thought about that, because at the time, friends and family kind of not separated from us, but they just were afraid to call. They were afraid to bother us because we were, it was taking up our life, and that's what OCD does. That's really what a disability does. It can take up your life, and so they were really more afraid to do it. But like with my daughter as an example, what I would have asked them to do is to um, like again, as part of the example, my daughter at the time was in Scouts, in Girl Scouts. And like I said, she had to kind of quit that because she couldn't go, you know. And so I wish we would have done was to ask those girls from Girl Scouts or the Scout leaders, hey, could you even write a letter or a card once in a while? Or come by and visit or something. The visit would have been a little tougher because the way my daughter was handling it was not the greatest. Or, can you come by and sit with my child for a couple hours while I run out and do grocery shopping? Or just taking, one important part for the parents and the caregivers for disabilities, for anxiety, uh, kids or people dealing with anxieties or disabilities, the caretakers really need to take care of themselves too. They need to ask for what they need and take the time for themselves too. Being able, because it is a burnout place, it, depending on how bad the situation is. So so then they talk about here in this article, about relationships and feelings with a person that is dealing with disabilities or anxiety or OCD. Acknowledge your child's fears and assure her that many teenagers feel anxious from time to time. So I don't know. I had read over this before, but I hadn't really thought about. I might say that a little differently. Um, Really, we want to listen to their fears, listen to their feelings, but I don't really want to try to justify it by telling them other teenagers go, because they're going to say, well, they're not me, and we don't want to do that. We don't want it's dousing their um, fears and their feelings of what's going on for them. So it's really important. I mean, that's what my wife and I are doing right now. We're teaching a parents' communication course because the way we respond to things can really escalate anxiety or de-escalate it. And we really want to de-escalate it. And so you want to listen to their fears and acknowledge those feelings and fears and say, a lot of times it's a simple, wow, I can imagine, I can really sense the fear there. And you're really feeling a fear with this. And let them just talk through it instead of trying to justify it by telling them. I don't agree with this in this particular part of the article where the part of it's true, but part of it's not. They talk about here helping your child find peer networks for teenagers with disabilities or anxiety or chronic or OCD, which is true. Finding some kind of support. Sometimes it can be helpful if they understand and they see somebody else that's going through it to feel a little bit better, to relate to that other person, to know that they're not alone in what they're doing. And encourage your child to use educational support from different avenues like hospitals, groups, things like that, other resources to help educate themselves so they understand what's going on in their body, which could help. Um, and then, they talk about here helping your child develop a plan to keep up with schoolwork or friends or different things. So then they talk about everyday life, and they talk about spending time with them, doing activities. Um, you're really trying to minimize your focus on the illness and the disability, trying your best to treat them as you would treat any child or any person. So that's kind of the gist of that article and talking about the disabilities. Again, I think that there's some important parts to this. Like I said, dealing with anxiety, like I said, I would really recommend highly for the parents or the caregivers to really be cautious of themselves, taking care of themselves almost first. It's kind of like that idea of the mask on an airplane, putting the mask on yourself versus your children, put it on yourself first. Again, asking for help, looking and researching and finding the help for your child can be of great resource. Um, and I'm thinking of listing some well, there are some resources up, and I'm going to add to the resources on the invisiblewheelchair.com website regarding this and different things that you can find for resources. So, and lastly, this is something I had to learn kind of the hard way, is being the compassionate coach, I would say, the compassionate person, trying to remember that within that um, that disability there is your child that you love and care about. And sometimes it can get really tough. Sometimes it can get so tough and anger can come out and frustration and all of that, is to try your best to remember that this is your loving child there. This is your loving teenager there. And try your best to have compassion at that point and to release the anger. And like I said, if you want to use the tapping, which I'm going to do work of tapping to go along with this, that can help ease some of that anger, ease some of the pain, and help the compassionate part. So I hope this helps in somewhat defining it. Like I said, this is something that I had to just do some research on. I'm going to do some more research on it to try to find some resources and stuff to put out there as part of this month talking about disabilities. And stay tuned, like I said. And if you're listening to this in the some future place, look up Hines was her name, the lawyer. Um, the interview that's going to be done this month, which is May of 2021. No, I'm sorry, it's going to be done in July of 2021. I'm recording it in May, this in May, and I recorded her in May, but it will go up in July. So if you miss this during the month of July and you're listening to it sometime later on, just check out July of 2021. Her name is Annette Hines. She is a lawyer for special needs and disability because she had a child that was disabled, severely disabled, and she went through all kinds of stuff to try to get that to help her. And unfortunately, the child passed away. But it's a very good interview. She's a really neat person, and so stay tuned for that. And I hope this helped in some way, shape, or form. So take care. This concludes this podcast. We hope you will subscribe if you haven't already. Remember, we would love your comments. Or if you have a story to tell, we want to put it up on the podcast. Simply go to invisiblewheelchair.com to do that. Don't forget to like us on Facebook at Invisible Wheelchair Podcast. If you or someone you know would like to be a guest, we love guests. So simply go to invisiblewheelchair.com and contact us from there. Gina and I are here to help you or your family get to a better place naturally. Simply visit focusedhealthyfamily.com for more information. Thank you for joining us on this journey. Keep tapping and focusing forward for a better way.